In this video, we're going to talk about the 4 important ways that you can use timing in your material. So timing is obviously more of a performance aspect, so you would be talking about the actual way you're delivering a line, but I think it is important to have a good understanding of how timing works while you are actually writing your material as well. So it's not just when you're thinking about, you write your joke and then once the joke is finished, you say, okay, now how do I deliver the joke? I think it's really important that you understand how you're going to deliver the joke while you're actually writing it. So here are the 4 important ways that you can use timing. And I'll start with the most obvious ones, and then I'll go down to more of the really small pauses with the kind of the micro pauses at the end. So number 1 is that timing gives you time to breathe on stage. So when you're delivering your material, this is where you have your period, which is like a full stop where you can actually take a full breath and then you can continue what you're talking about. And then maybe like a comma where you have like a half of a stop. And this is a break that you have where you can breathe, but then of course a comma you're going to only do about half as long as you would do for a period. So obviously this is an important part just because you need to be able to deliver your lines effectively, and if you don't have any breath to do it, then that's going to be a problem. Number 2 is a less obvious way of using timing, and this is the pause that often happens. It's not always the case, but there's often a pause between the last setup line and the punchline. And the purpose of this pause is that it gets the audience leaning forward and it gets them in their head. They're preparing to laugh because you have this slight pause, and that pause that they realize that something is about to change. And so once you hit that punchline, the audience has already sensed that you're about to hit it, so they're ready to start laughing. So that is a pause that happens just before the punchline. And again, not every punchline is going to have it, but it is an effective way of really highlighting that a punchline is about to come, and that makes the punchline hit a little bit harder.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Number 3 is directly after the punchline. Now, I've already talked about how important it is for you to keep your setup lines simple so that the audience can hear the punchline and then they have enough time to connect that punchline to all the information in the setup. They have time to do problem solving where they say, okay, I think it goes together like this, and then, okay, now I understand the joke. Now, that does take time for the audience to do. So the third way of using timing in your material is directly after the punchline. You have to give a long enough pause for the audience to actually understand the joke. Now, if you have stage fright, that might be an issue for you because it will feel awkward. My opinion on this is that your pause, if you don't know how big of a pause to do, then you should always err on the side of having too long of a pause rather than too short. If you have too short of a pause, then you're going to start your joke before the audience has fully understood the last punchline. And so the audience is going to, they're still problem solving in their head. And then right before they start laughing, you say, and so the other day I was over, and then they have to stop laughing because they don't want to miss the next punchline that you say. They don't want to miss that setup because they won't understand the next joke. So it's not that the joke isn't funny, it's that you didn't give them enough of a pause for them to fully understand the joke and then to begin laughing at the joke. So again, you should have, if you don't know, too long of a pause is way, way better than having too short of one. So number 4, and this is a less obvious way of using pauses and timing, but this is what I would call more like a micro pause because they are not long at all. And the purpose of these really super short pauses is to group information together. So if you listen to how people naturally tell stories, especially you go to a bunch of stand-up comedians, watch really, really funny, it doesn't matter one-liner or a storyteller, but storyteller will be easier to see this. But notice how they group together certain words that form one single idea. And it can be all in the same sentence, but you can still see that there's tiny, tiny micro pauses where it's very clear that these 4 words all go together. And then these 6 words, they all go together. And they're very, very tiny pauses in between. But those pauses make it easy for you to group together like 4 or 5 words, group it together into one single idea that you can remember. And of course, having one single idea to remember is way easier for the audience because you hit the punchline, and then now I only have a couple of ideas. Whereas if you give the audience no pause at all and you're talking all in a very monotone voice, then all of a sudden it becomes difficult and really, really difficult for you to know which words are the most important and which word like that is like I don't know how many words I just said, maybe like 20, but you can notice that there's no pause between, or the pause is exactly the same between every single word. And what that does is instead of having groups of ideas inside of each sentence, now you have just 20 words that happen to be together. And now you have 20 pieces of information that you have to remember. And then the reason that that sentence, like if you're listening to that sentence, it probably felt really, I mean, not just awkward, but by the end of it, you're going to probably start feeling mentally tired because what happens is you are responsible for grouping together all the words that go together. Because in my sentence there, I was not having any of these micro pauses that allow you to group together one set of words and say, okay, I understand this. Here's another group. I can put it together. And then it's very easy for you to follow along there. So if you don't have those little micro pauses there, the audience has to do it themselves, and that is a very tiring thing for the audience to do. So not only is there too much information in the setup line now, but now the audience is mentally exhausted from trying to group together all the information and make sense of what you're talking about. So these micro pauses, very, very short pauses, they're not even, you don't even take a breath in while you're doing it. They're the same breath, but they're tiny pauses that group together information and make it easy for the audience to digest it. So these are the 4 ways that you can use timing in your writing. And of course, when you're actually performing, that's the important parts, right? The only thing that we care about in our writing is to make sure that we have a good performance. And it doesn't matter what you planned on doing, it really matters what actually happens on the stage. So I recommend that as you get your material ready for the stage for the first time, you really keep this idea in mind. And when you practice material, don't just practice stringing the words together. You need to practice the full pauses, and you also need to practice those micro pauses. Now, if you are more comfortable on stage, then I think like thinking about where should the micro pause be. I don't think that that's an important thing. I think you just need to understand that it exists, and then you can, just by knowing that it could be an issue, you will practice your material with these tiny pauses. And that is all that's really important. So don't form this into like okay, I'm gonna do a micro pause right here. That's, if you're doing that, you're getting way too detailed and you're gonna end up stressing yourself out and you're gonna make a very, very complex writing process for yourself.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and check out a list of free comedy training resources in the description below.